everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a review for Shadow of the Gods. This is one of the few books I've read recently that I actually feel is worth the hype. This is an adult fantasy trilogy, I believe. It only goes to 3 books. I don't think they're planning another one. I am unsure, but as I said, this is an adult fantasy. It is very gory, has lots of adult themes like slavery and stuff like that in it. Potential nudity, just when it comes to the trolls apparently, but yes. Like I said, this is definitely an adult fantasy, not a YA. I really enjoyed this. So, let's kind of just jump into what the plot line is about. Basically, it's they live in this very Norse Viking inspired fantasy world, and the gods are like these kind of like these giant animals. Like there's a dragon, there's a giant snake, and there's a wolf. And there was a war, and they killed off these gods, and so people thought these gods were dead, but they had basically mingled in with the people, and there are these people that have the bloodlines of these gods. They're basically like their partial descendants, and because they have the bloodlines of these gods, they take up the abilities and attributes of their god. And basically the story is that they think these gods are dead, and there's 2 like warring nations with each other, and they're basically saddling up for war. And then they discover that these gods aren't actually dead, and then they're trying to take like these I'm trying to remember the words for them. They differ depending on which god they're descended from, but basically the people who have like the bloodlines of these gods, they are treated as thralls, and there's kind of like 3 different little subplots going on in the book. But basically, like I said, they think the gods are dead, and then they kind of realize, oh shit, no, one of them is still alive. And basically there's like this war coming, and they're gearing up for it, all that good stuff. I could have worded that better, but like in this first book, there's like 3 different perspectives, and they don't really go into the overarching story. It takes their perspectives, and then they don't really come together until the end. So it's more of a very it's establishing the characters and their backstories and where they stand in the story going forward for the other books. So the 3 main characters, which are the POVs you're going to be following, is Varg, Orca, and Elvar. And Varg is a he was a thrall, which is a slave, and he ends up getting his freedom by accidentally killing his slave master, basically, and he's on the run, and his sister died, and he's trying to find what their equivalent of like a witch is, so she can do a ritual so he can see what happened to his sister. And that's kind of where his story starts, is that he's ends up on this dock area with these group of mercenaries called the Bloodsworn, and he sees that they have one of these witches, and so he basically tries to fight because they're looking and recruiting for people, but of course they want you to earn your right in your rank, so he has to fight one of their most formidable champions, and that's kind of where his story starts and picks up, and it's really interesting. And then we have Orca, who is a mother, and she has a husband and a child, and she lives on this homestead out of town area, and I really loved her point of view. I love it. She has like these little like fae familiar creatures on her stead. One is Spurt, and then her child finds one, and of course takes him home like, "Mommy, look what I found." And she's like, "Oh, hell no." And then his dad's just like, "No, let the boy have it." And her name is Vesely, I think is how you pronounce it. And it's basically like this little fairy creature that eats teeth and stuff. So I don't know. I like it when they have like little whimsical like companions and stuff. And basically, her story starts when she gets called into the Jarl's, oh, what do you call it? The Longhouse? I don't remember. I'm not well versed in Norse. Um, so she goes, and well, both her and her husband go. It's kind of like a town meeting, and the Jarl tells them about how they've allied with the Queen in the warring nations because they think her side is going to win. And then they go back, and she basically has to, they're kind of questioning their stance and whether they should run or not because they don't want like war or anything like that. Their pasts, they don't really go into it a lot, but you get like an idea of what it's like. They're trying to live a simple life and whatnot, so they're deciding what to do. She goes to this tree, which is like their version of a nymph, to find that the spirit was slain and that raiders had attacked their homestead and taken her child and murdered her husband. So that's kind of where her story starts, is that she's now on like a revenge vendetta to try and find her child. And then the third POV is Elvar. Did not like her POV that much, which is okay though, because she's the character that's not really meant to be liked. She's basically royalty. Basically, you find out like a couple chapters in that she is royalty to one of the kings that's wanting to fight with the other nation. She's around slavers. She doesn't really see anything wrong with that. And so she's not like the most likable POV. Basically, her story is that she has to, oh god. Now that I think about it, I don't really remember. I kind of read through like a lot of her chapters because I didn't really like her POV that much. But yeah, like I said, she wasn't supposed to be likable, so. I do have to say I loved Varg and Orca the most. I just really liked their backstories. Even the side characters were really good. Like, you really got like a sense of what they meant to the characters, and so you like got really attached to them, and when something happened to them you're like, no, because you know what they meant to the characters, and you like feel their loss the way the characters do. And I'm like, and like you just know like what losing them is gonna do to the character, and you're like, no, my sweet baby. Anyway, the writing style, I'm not a huge fan of multiple point of views, but I'd say this one actually did a fairly good job of it. Most of the POVs kept me fairly captivated. That's like one of the main problems. I don't really like multiple POVs is because there's always that one POV that's like not very interesting. I really like his writing style. There's something about it that's like really captivating. Like the way he like structures his sentences is really good. His prose is really good. It's like the perfect mix of being descriptive without being overly descriptive. I think my only complaint about the writing style is that he does try to mix in like random like old Norse words, and not all of them are from the same region. Like some of them are Swedish, some of them are like almost Polish, and then like some of them are like Norwegian, and it's like, and they get like a little redundant sometimes, because there's one, I think it was called like, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's like Briena or something like that, which basically means armor, or like more specifically, it's like a chainmail type of armor. So he would say like a character was wearing the Briena armor, and you're like, they're wearing their armor, or like they're wearing their chainmail armor, and it's like, why did you have to use like a foreign word for that? Why can't you just say chainmail armor? And like, it's not like, I get trying to sell the idea that it's like a Viking-esque world, but like when you just have like random small worlds mixed in with things, it just kind of feels like a little weird. And he did put a glossary in the back, so you could look up most of the words, but like he didn't list all of them, and you can definitely tell some of them he like made up for his fantasy world. So I spent like a lot of time googling and being like, is this an actual world? Like, is this an actual word? Did he make it up? Like, is this a mix of other things? Like, so I kind of wish he had described that more in his glossary, to be like, these ones are Old Norse, these ones are made up for this fantasy world. And I really wish he had like put a pronunciation guide with it, because there's a lot of these words I didn't really know how to pronounce, and like every time I had to read it, like I just like stumbled upon it in my head, being like, yeah. So if I mispronounce anything, I'm so sorry. Um, what is it with him and troll balls? I thought it was like really funny, because nowhere in his writing for any of the human characters does he mention nudity or like sexually talk about the characters at all. But the trolls, like the first time Elvar comes across a troll, of course it's a male troll. And they have to be like, oh, his giant horns and tusks and his giant swollen balls. And I'm like, what? And then this whole fight, it mentions how many times she is ducked under these trolls' balls. It's so ridiculous. They mentioned this troll's balls like 5 different times on one page. And then Bard comes across a troll, and of course it's a male troll, and again with the balls, they're like, you could tell it's a male by his giant swollen balls flapping in the wind. And it's like, what is it with you and troll balls? It's just so funny, because like, no nudity anywhere else but the trolls. You gotta point out the troll balls. He couldn't just leave it at, oh, the tusks and the antlers let you know it's a male. No, they had to mention the giant balls. If I had a quarter for every time he said troll balls, I'd be a little richer. Let's see. Another thing about the writing style is it did take quite a while for the POVs to come together, like quite literally till the last chapter, which usually most POVs start to come together towards the middle of the book. But I was actually okay with it, because they really established the characters. You really got to know their backstory, where they stand currently, where they're going moving forwards, like where they are mentally. And so I actually really enjoyed that, because I feel like most authors, they just kind of skip over a lot of character development and establishment in order to try and get the story going. But I really like that this one really took its time with it. You really got to see everyone's perspectives and how they ended up where they are, because it made you more attached to the character, and you actually like give a shit about them as a character. And so now you know where they're standing moving forward with the series, and now that they've all met together. And I really liked where it left off at the end too, because Elvar's doesn't really mix at the end. it's mostly just Varg and Orca's POVs that finally start to come together, because Varg ends up the Bloodsworn, and then the leader of the Bloodsworn ignores Orca, and at the end, their POVs come together when you see Orca, and I don't want to spoil the ending, so I'm just going to say they come together and he recognizes her, and that's kind of where it leaves off. And I really kind of like the ending scene, like before he recognizes her, because before it jumps to like the chieftain and how he recognizes her, you have Varg's perspective of the scene, and like this is like the end of a battle scene with Orca, and she has her little familiars with her, and you just like, I just like the way it was described. It's just Vesely with like this shit-eating grin, like this grubby little fairy just sitting on a pile of teeth, just eating the teeth of her enemies. And you know, Varg, who's never seen that before, is hilarious. Like, I don't know why, I just really like that, because in my mind I could just imagine, because he describes her as sitting there smiling while chomping on like what he thinks is like something just like I'm trying to remember what it was he thought it was, but then he realizes it's teeth and he's like, oh, you know, and you just see this fairy like shitting grin just eating these teeth. I don't know, I thought that was interesting. But yeah, like overall I really love this book. I would say the strongest point of this book is the characters. Like I said, I really, really love the characters. I just love their perspectives, and you really get to know them. They felt like actual people, because they're not perfect. It's not a power fantasy. Stuff happens to them. They make mistakes. They feel things. Like, I loved Varg's perspective, because he lived his whole life as a slave. He doesn't really know the outside world. He was just on like a farmstead the whole time. And so when he joins the Bloodsworn, like killing and war, it's all new to him. And he expresses being afraid. And instead of being like chastised, they're like, no, that's perfectly reasonable. You're new to this life. We wouldn't expect you to, you know, feel otherwise. And then one of the characters gives him like this really good chat about how being afraid is normal, and you can't have courage without being afraid, because, you know, courage is persevering despite being afraid. And I really liked that. It just shows like the humanity, and how even though he's a guy, he's still gonna, you know, be afraid of things, not know what he's doing. He gets his ass kicked a lot, and I think that's hilarious, because like, let's be honest, when we're all doing a new trade or like learning something, we're not going to be good at it. So like halfway through the book, every time he's in a battle, he doesn't really know what to do. He's new to this. He hasn't really gotten a lot of training, and he just kind of wins out of sheer luck. And I always thought that was kind of funny. And I just really liked the dynamics, like I said, with the side characters even being written really well, because he basically forms a brotherhood with these other characters. He feels like he was alone, and because he lost his sister, that he never find like a family again. So he gets like basically this found family with these other characters. And oh man, something happens to one of them that just like ripped my heart out a little, because you're like, no, because you're starting to root for him, and you're like, oh, look at that, he's got like a friend and brotherhood. But yeah, it was really good. And I really loved Orca. Like, she is like a badass, kick-ass character, but they're not afraid to give her more feminine traits. He wasn't afraid to, like, you know, make her softer, while also how would you say that, like, making her stern at the same time. And I really loved her POV, because it just shows what a mother is willing to go through for her child and her family. And it's so hard to find those kind of themes in fantasy anymore. It's like everything's got to be like a girl boss and she's got to be a powerhouse. So I really liked Orca's perspective. Like, I don't know. And like, she has humanity to her because even though she is stern and tough from her past, there are moments where she empathizes with other characters and she's like, I know I shouldn't do this, but I'm gonna do it anyway. And there was a scene I really loved, before her kid gets taken. He tells her that he's like afraid of, you know, the world and stuff and things happening and how he wanted to learn swordcraft and stuff like that. And they're basically like cuddled up for bed and stuff. And while he's talking to her about this, he sees like a moth cobweb in the corner and he sees a moth stuck in it. And he sees the spider trying to catch it. And so he gets up to try and free the moth. And she tells him basically that that's just nature, the way of life, and to let it happen. But then he tells her, like, that wouldn't be a very good death. That wouldn't be very nice. And if you could change something about it, then maybe we should. And she takes that to thought and actually comes into use later in the book where she finds this raven, like this mythical type of fairy-esque raven, caught in the web, this giant web of these giants, basically like frost spiders. And she remembers what her son said about how that wouldn't be a very good death, because she thought about just leaving it and being like, well, that's nature, that's not my problem. And then she has that feeling of empathy and remembers what her child says. And so she goes and frees the raven. And I love it because every time she picks these feelings of empathy and helps these people, she always gets rewarded for it. So like after she frees the raven, its mate comes and helps them, and then a later battle down the line they come and help her back because she helped them in return. And she also helped out these other siblings from before her story kind of starts and kids get taken, and they come and help her and they come back for her because she helped them in return. And so I really like that. It shows that when you help people out, and you show empathy, you get rewarded for it. People are willing to help you back. And I think that's something that's not often expressed in fantasy anymore. I feel like people just kind of, like a lot of the main characters just kind of boss their way through things, and then they just kind of get their way because they say so. I just don't really like that. So I just really like that in this book because it really showed humanity from both Varg and Orca's perspectives. And Elvar, like I said, I didn't really like her perspective, but again, you're not really supposed to, she's not really supposed to be likable. She's kind of supposed to be like the antagonist character. She's the one that kind of unleashes the dragon back on the world and the god. And like, I know she's not supposed to be likable, but there's a lot of times when reading through her POV that you're like, oh my god, woman. Like, this guy just takes out her partner and she just can't fathom why he would do that. And the kicker is that he's a well-known slaver and this was a thrall. And he's like, he's a well-known slaver, he deserved to die. And he's like going on this really long speech about how he's a person too, and how he doesn't like deserve to be a slave. And instead of like hearing him out, she just like immediately tries to murder him and be like, oh my god. And it's like, I get it, he murdered a person, but there's like a very good reason for it. And then of course they like release the god and everything, and they're like, oh, she's like, oh my god, what have we done? And it's like, girl, be for real right now. You know exactly what you did. You knew what you were doing. You knew what you were messing around with. Like, be for real right now. But yeah, I feel like this really shines through with its characters. Like, it is kind of a slow burn because of the different POVs and like the build up to it, but it's really good. It's really good. I highly recommend it. I feel like if you like The God Killer, or you like The Witcher, or like Game of Thrones, I feel like you would really like this book. Or if you just like low fantasy, um, and like what I mean by low fantasy is just like low magic in the world. Like it's a little bit more rarer, and like things like witches and wizards are a lot more revered because of that rarity. I think you would really like this. Or if you just like Viking inspired stuff in general, I think you'd really like this book. So yeah, overall, I highly recommend picking it up. If you've read this book, let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. I would love to know your opinions and thoughts on it. Or if you haven't read it but my review turned you on to reading it, let me know. Make sure to comment, and subscribe, and I'll make sure to see you guys again in the next video. Bye!